In today's lesson, we're going to talk about bearings, how to use diagrams to find back bearings. So now let's begin. We have some questions here that we're going to answer all of them. So stay tuned and focus. Let's begin with the first one. Two trees, X and Y, are in the same plane with a bearing of X from Y at 37 degrees. Find a bearing of Y from X. So the moment you see a question like this, you should know that, this is a back bearing question. So the reason is simple. Because we have moved from X to Y, and now we are moving back from Y to X. So this is, a back bearing question. So whenever you see a question like this, that is how you're going to do it. Now let's get our first, bearing, which is the bearing of X from Y. And that is 37 degrees. So let me get that one here. So let's get our compass right now. With the help of the ruler, we can get that. So that's going to be here. Let me get it here. So this is my compass. So we have the, the North Pole. So here the South Pole, the East, and this is the West Pole. And we should know that we want the angle 037 degrees, which is the same as 37 degrees. Before we get our bearing, which is 037 degrees, we have to know that as you move from one quadrant to the other quadrant, you've actually covered 90 degrees. So from the north to the east, which is northeast, we've covered 90 degrees here. The same thing applies to this one. So that is how, the whole thing works. So from 90, then to the next one, which is going to be 180, 270, and finally to the north, which is, 360 degrees. And bearings are generally taken in the clockwise direction from the north. So that's going to be in this direction. Something like this. So that is something that you're supposed to know. So with this one said, how do we get our bearing of X from Y? We have to get this one first before we can move on to find a bearing of Y from X. So you have to get our first one, that is 37 degrees or 037 degrees. So I'm going to get my 37 degrees somewhere here in the first quadrant. So I'll just have to move this way. That is it. Now the question is, the new point that we formed here, what should be the name of that point? Is that going to be the point Y or the point X? And the initial point which is here, is that going to be the point X or the point Y? That is something that you're supposed to know. Now here is going to be the point Y, and here is going to be, the point X. The reason is simple, because we want the bearing of, X from Y. So as we move from, Y to X, that is why we say X from Y. So that's going to be from, the Y to this direction. So the arrow should be on this line like this. Now, the main question is to find the bearing of Y from X. That is Y from X. And how do we get that? But even before we get that, let's get our angle, which is 37 degrees here. That is from the north to this particular, line. That is 37 degrees. So let me get that one there. So we have 37 degrees here. Now, so we are going to find the bearing of Y from X using this point. So what you have to know is that, where the line ends is where we are going to get our next compass. So let me get that compass here. So that is going to be here. The exact place that the line ended, we get our next compass there. So here's our North Pole for the new compass. Now that we have our next compass, we can easily go ahead and find the back bearing, which is the bearing of Y from X. That is what the question is demanding. And before we do that, we are going to deploy a certain angle property here. And the angle property that we're going to use here is alternate angles. Now you can see that this angle here, 37 degrees, and that of this angle, they alternate. In fact, they form the Z shape. So here too is going to be 37 degrees. So we have 37 degrees here. And the reason is simple. They are alternate angles. And now that we have our 37 degrees here, we can go ahead and find the back bearing, that is Y from X. And how do we do that? We're going to move from the north in a clockwise direction up to, this line. We just add all the angles that we've covered. And we should know that as we move from each quadrant to the other, we are moving 90 degrees. So that means that the answer is going to be this. From the north to this side, which is the east, we've covered 90. So that's going to be 90 degrees. Plus from the north, from the east to the south here is another 90. So plus another 90 degrees. And finally, we add a small angle to it. So that's going to be 37 degrees. So that will give us 217, degrees. So the back bearing, which is the bearing of Y from X, is 217 degrees in terms of, three-figure bearings. 217 degrees or 217 degrees. Now, we know that we can use the formula to get the answer. I hope you're aware of that. And the formulas that we can use are either theta plus 180 degrees or theta minus 180 degrees. depending on the bearing that was given initially. So if theta is greater than 180 degrees, we use this formula, the second formula. And if theta is less than 180 degrees, we use the first one. So in this case, theta, which is 37 degrees, is less than 180 degrees. So in that case, we're going to use this formula. So that's going to be 37 plus 180, and we are still going to get 217 degrees. So we can easily use this formula to get the answer. But here we are using the diagram to get the answer. So take note of that. Now we can move on to the next question. So let's get this question. The bearing of Jude from Bobby is 140 degrees. We have to find the bearing of Bobby from Jude. So this is a typical back bearing question that we are going to use diagram to get the answer. So first of all, let's get the bearing of Jude from Bobby. That is given as 140 degrees. So we can easily get that one here. Let's get it right now. So that's going to be this. So we have our north pole here. So remember that we are always moving in the clockwise direction from the north. So here's 90. If you move to this point, that's going to be 180. So that means that this bearing will fall in the second quadrant in this regard. So we're going to get our 140 degrees here. So from the north to this, to the east, we have 90 degrees here. We are not done. We have to get 140 degrees. So how do we get that? So plus what will give you 140? So that's going to be 50. That's obvious. So we have 50 degrees here. So that means 50 plus 90 will give us 140 degrees. So that's the exact place that we can get our angle 140. So that means that from the north to this line is 140 degrees. So we have our bearing that is 140 degrees. So the question is, where are we going to put Jude or Bobby? Are we putting Jude here or Bobby here? So we're going to put Bobby here. That is B for Bobby. So Jude is going to be somewhere here. So the bearing of Jude from Bobby is 140. So you have to get Jude here, and that will be the same point that this line ended. So we have Jude here. And that is where we are also going to get our next compass. So we have that one here. So always know that the very point that the line ended is where we get the next compass. So we have our north pole here. And after getting this, that means you're actually in the right direction. And we are almost done as well. This is the time that we deploy the angle property, which is alternate angles. So we can see that this angle, this angle here, the 50 degrees, and that of this, they form, alternate angles. They form a Z shape. So here is also 50 degrees. At this point, we are almost done. We have to get the bearing of, Bobby from Jude. And how do we do that? We just take from the clockwise direction, we calculate all the angles that we cover from here to this point. So from the north in the clockwise direction up to this point. And let me get that one here. So that means from the north to this point, we have 90 degrees. So that's going to be 90 degrees plus another 90. So plus another 90 degrees plus another 90. From this point. So we have another 90 degrees. And finally to 50. So we have 50 degrees. So let's add to see what we're going to get. So the sum of these three will give us 270. So that is plus 50 degrees. And our answer is going to be 320 degrees. So that's the bearing of Bobby from Jude. Now, if you want to use the formula you can, decide to use that. So the initial angle given is 140. So the formula that we're going to use is theta plus 180 degrees because, theta is less than 180. So we have to add. So that's going to be 140 plus 180. So when you add, you're going to get 320 degrees. So that is an easy approach to get the answer. But you should also learn how to, use the diagram to get the same answer. Now we can move ahead to the next question. That is, if the distance between P and Q is 4 centimeters, and the bearing of Q from P is 320 degrees, we have to find the bearing of P from Q. So this is a very big, angle or bearing. So that's going to be in the fourth quadrant. The last one. So let me get a compass here to see the exact place of this bearing. So that's going to be somewhere here. Let me get it here so that we can get enough space on top here. We have the north here, and 320 degrees or the 320 degrees will fall in this quadrant. That's the quadrant for 360 degrees. So that is where we can get this particular bearing. So we have that one here. So where are we going to put our P or our Q? This is the bearing of Q from P, which is 320 degrees. Here's going to be P, and we are going to get our Q here. That was a new point that we're going to get. And we should know that from P to Q is 4 centimeters as stated in the question. So you're going to get 4 centimeters here. So that is it. So we have to get our next compass on a point scale. I can get my, my compass like this on a point scale. And we have our north pole here once again. Now, before we get our back bearing, let's know the angle that we're going to get here. Let's calculate that particular angle, because that's going to be used here to find the back bearing. And before we do that, we should know that we are talking about 320 degrees. Now, from the north to this point is 90, another 90, another 90. So we have 270. So 270 plus what will give you 320 degrees. So we just have to subtract, 270 from 320. And what remains will be the angle that we are looking for. And that's going to be 50 degrees. So we have 50 degrees here. So from this point up to this line is 320 degrees. And obviously, this angle too is going to be, 50 degrees. And we know the reason. They are alternate angles. So now, if you want to calculate the bearing of P from Q, we just have to, move from the north to this line. Let's get this bearing right now. So from the north to this point is 90. So we have 90 degrees plus this small angle, which is 50 degrees. We have 50 degrees. And 90 plus 50, that will give us 140 degrees or 140 degrees. So that's the bearing of P from Q. Very easy. Now, if you want to use the formula, in this case, the initial bearing which is given is 320. So we are going to use the second formula, which is theta minus 180 degrees, because theta is greater than 180. So we have 320 degrees minus 180 degrees, and that will also give us 140 degrees. So either way, we're going to get the same answer. Find the bearing of A from B if the bearing of B from A is 225. So first of all, we have been given this bearing, B from A. So our bearing will fall on A, and the bearing is 225. So let me get that one here. So let me get that bearing, 225 degrees. So this is my north. And now, remember, it is from A. So here is going to be the point A, this particular point. Now, how do we get our 225 degrees? That is our bearing. We should know that we are moving in a clockwise direction from the north. And as you move from, each quadrant to the next quadrant, we cover 90 degrees. So here is going to be 90, another 90, making 180 degrees. So to get 225 or 225 degrees, then it should fall in this quadrant, because 90 plus this one, in all, we are going to get 270. So that means our bearing will be somewhere in this quadrant, in the third quadrant, in that regard. So we have our bearing here. So we're going to get 225 degrees in this quadrant. So what you have to know is that we've covered 90 plus 90, making 180, plus a certain angle here, from this point to this point, to make, 225. So we just have to know that particular number here. And how do we do that? We can just add 90 to 90 to get 180, then we subtract from 225. And that will give us 45 degrees. So that means that 90 plus 90, which is 180 degrees, plus 45 will give us 225 degrees or 225 degrees. So we have this one, that is the bearing of, B from A. So that means we are going to get our point B somewhere here. So that's the point B. So to get the bearing of A from B, what do we do? Let's get our next compass. And that's going to be on this point. So where the line ends, that is where we get, our next compass. So that's going to be something like this. And we have our north pole here. Now, the moment you do this, you remember that we are going to use the angle property here. And how do we get that one? You can see that this angle, 45 degrees, and that of this angle, they form alternate angles. So this angle, this small angle here, is 45 degrees. So simply or easily, the bearing of A from B is 45 degrees. Why? Because as you move from the north to this point, this line, we just covered 45 degrees. So that is 045 degrees. In terms of three-figure bearings. So the answer is going to be, 0.45 degrees.